Thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you for inviting us today. And this is a very interesting theme and very much the need of the hour. So I will begin, and my colleague will take over halfway. So our paper is titled After Apocalypse, a critical inquiry into the politics of hope. So this pandemic has brought with it an en masse baggage of anxiety, panic, vulnerability, and mass surveillance, which existed before as well, but it has become more sinister and powerful now. So surveillance today is like the virus in the air, is invisible and everywhere in the form of digital applications that track our every activity and sell it to corporates and governments. But there's no explicit sense of exposure, as it has the illusion of anonymity. But one needs to remember here that this visibility is also a trap, and the panopticon is a symptom of the disease of surveillance capitalism that, through supposed transparency and security, afflicts us all subtly. So the pandemic has highlighted this issue like never before. There has been increased mass surveillance through digital applications in the garb of maintaining the safety of our body. So this sort of panopticon has always been an ally of the neoliberal state, and the pandemic and its resulting instability has led to the resurgence of a new form of biopolitics with the instrumental application of what is known as surveillance capitalism. Crisis, be it the Great Depression or the Bengal famine or the 2008 subprime crisis, or even the coronavirus pandemic, it has always been accompanied with a renewed, invigorated functioning of the neoliberal regime. So it has only risen stronger with every crisis. So this pandemic is no different in the sense that the richest 1% have only become richer with an abysmally large gap of structural inequality and mass impoverishment. So, in this crisis times, with the elaborate performances of nationalistic sentimentalities, the state has become the only, what can be said as the pseudo savior. So, with increasing economic instability, the threat to its own power of the state has been periodically tackled through the mechanisms of media propaganda, blame games, and mass surveillance. So, these have control over us even without our awareness of the extent to which the modern sovereign state has the authority over our life, our body, and even our thoughts. So this in itself is the apocalypse, so that has engulfed us slowly, like a fog on a winter night. So this chaos that we see today in terms of the farm laws or the contemporary court action on the comedians or even the draconian UAPA or the anti-conversion laws, and many more, these are not one-time events, but these are symptoms of this apocalypse or larger crisis that we see. But even during the hovering risk of death, the farmers protest, the students protest, even the Black Lives Matter movements and other forms of resistances globally, uh, these show that the hope of emancipation of masses from the clutches of this, jingoistic, nationalistic, neoliberal regime is still alive. So this hope of the masses as the real saviors of humanity against this authoritarian modern state is what unveils the real behind this illusionary biopolitics of the state. So this paper seeks to conceptualize this real that is molded by this politics of hope of the masses in the age of what we know as necropolitics. At the same time, it also attempts to scrutinize the possibility of the movements after the biopolitics and the subjugation of life to it. So this panopticon is not just the authority over our virtual data by corporations or the perfectly error-free future that it promises to give, but the authority over our life. And it is a new form of exploitation and control over humankind by the modern state. Now, the weapon is not just bombs or guns, it is much more insidious than that. And this realization of the crisis urges us to seek the kind of politics that is needed to deal with it. So, what kind of politics are we talking about here? Um, Now we dismiss this Machiavellian definition of politics, which is about the sovereign art of lying for the accumulation of or the lust for power. So we take recourse to Alan Badiou, who advocates that politics as a journey towards truth with the idea of pluralist justice at its core. So, this philosophical reorientation counters the tendency of not questioning the existing frameworks of politics that we see today, which does not have any foundation in truth. And that's why the political script is nothing but a paper tiger that we see today. So the reason perhaps is our presupposed idea of politics, which is far away from our idea of life itself. In the late capitalist era, we have surrendered our freedom and become a cog in the machine, as Eric Fromm says. And what Marx would say is this loss of self, and we are reduced to performing the animal functions only. So this means that for the resurrection of self, which is essential for becoming a political subject, one needs to uphold the work of death. This means to assume death and simultaneously live with the assumption of death. We need to create a politics that does not care about dying in terms of material existence. It needs to be a transcendence of being, a body politics, which in which we have the power over our own body without the influence of the apparatus of state power. So if the modern subject does not care about the body, then the physical body, then all the biopolitical power of the modern state over the citizen's life and death will collapse. And when the subject denies this existence of the body, then only we can think of a new kind of politics of hope, which is beyond the fear of death. So thus, while confronting death and coexisting with it is the life of spirit, according to this Hegelian framework that distinguishes man from animals and that creates the possibility of sovereign political subject. So, in the spiritless modern time where the fundamental understanding of life is missing, politics has become an act of clamor or just noise with a hollow conceptualization of it. That is, politics has disappeared. So, what does it mean by disappearance of politics? So, if you observe the political performance, even in the authoritarian regimes, we see a certain kind of module being followed historically. So, this module has instilled a political rationality which doesn't have anything to do with the ontological status of politics itself. This political rationality has been termed as biopolitics by Foucault, where he states biopolitics takes control over life to put life in order, and that's how life becomes a subject of it. Therefore, we have turned into living dead or zombie in a death world where subjugation to the power of death is an inevitable part of our life. So now my colleague will take over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Magna. So, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, yes, huh, carry
Okay,
on.
okay. In this condition where life is at stake, politics without the concern of the question of life does not have the will to power. So, I am not questioning that existence of politics as a whole, but I am concerned about the absence of radical questioning on the ground of politics. The recent US presidential election has proved us again that we don't have any alternatives beyond choosing the lesser evil. Intellectuals like Noam Chomsky to Cornel West have expressed their strategic support, like vote for Biden is technically a vote against Trump. To Joe Biden, that portrays a restaurant where menu contains only two items. One is slow poison and another one is rapid poison. So for Hannah Arendt, relation between the lesser and the greater evil is more than intimate, as instead of protecting us from the greater evil, the lesser one leads us towards the greater one. So, if choosing the lesser evil in every 4 years, sending culprits to the parliament, and then asking rights from them are the meaning of politics, we need to start rethinking about it as it has lost the spirit within it. For Carl Smith, nothing is more modern than the onslaught against the political. The idea of sovereignty has been segregated from the idea of politics in the modern era. Smith defines sovereign as a source of becoming a political subject, as the one who takes the decision of the state of exception. But in reality, we see the state's sovereign power over citizen that results in the power over life itself. In the parliamentary democracy, politics is merely a tool for choosing between multiple so-called democratic options, but in actuality gives legitimacy to exercise power over life. One might claim himself innocent not for choosing the greater evil, but the very act of participation in the mechanism of producing monster is anti-political, as it gives the mandate of exercising sovereign power. Therefore, we need to rethink the resurrection of our lost sovereignty as human beings. This resurrection requires a critical consciousness, what Paulo Freire would call conscientization. But the pathological condition here is that the subject fears the risk linked to the idea of freedom itself. So, if I say this in Terry Eagleton's term, it's kind of like we need to free ourselves from ourselves in this condition. At the same time, it grabs the imposed meaning of freedom in a capitalist society where there's constant feeling of powerlessness. Smith's medication in this condition is to restore political subject from a source which does not exist, that is not subjugated to the sovereign state. In order to mold our politics of hope, we need to understand the establishment of the modern sovereign state. The modern sovereign state has been established by the means of a state of exception. Even if we think we are living in the age of democracy, but actually it's nothing less than a permanent state of exception, according to Agamben. This is similar to a state of emergency, but is based on the sovereign's or head of the state's ability to transcend the rule of law in the name of public good. The judiciary allows the state to eliminate but political opponent and the portion of people who can't be integrated into the political system. So the legal system we have today might appears to be normal condition, but this is absolute emergency situation in itself. State has the monopoly to set the common interest of the community and can slander anyone as anti-national. Therefore, state has become a sovereign entity by the means of the subjugation of its own people. Weber defines modern state as a monopoly of the juridical violence within the given territory. If this is so, we need to seek the answer why we tend to surrender our sovereign power to something that we have created. Partly because we have lost our self-defense mechanism, and that was possible as we refuse to accept life as it is and desire to have a juridical or constitutional life. If state as an organization has the monopoly of juridical violence, political aims should be to restore the sovereignty of the people. But what is the means for that end? Is there anything that justifies the end? For what it as mythical violence, as the precondition of its force is based on false ontology. He advocates divine violence as a force to encounter mythical violence. If the latter one is for lawmaking, the former stands for law destroying. If mythical violence threatens and set boundaries, divine violence strikes and breaks it. For the sake of the living, divine violence is pure power over all life, whereas for its own sake, mythical violence is bloody power over mere life. However, to counter the juridical violence, one needs enormous spirit, that is the hope of life beyond material living. But the danger of this strange time, including this COVID-19, is that we don't even have that. The spiritless condition is the result of the age of technicity, and the irresistible power of technology has made an ingenious but soulless generation, according to Carl Smith. And as the concept of the modern state theory are all secularized theological concept, therefore it has lost its meaning as the strength and force to counter the dynamic power of this age. Smith also argues that he takes Foucault's observation on Iranian revolution in 1979 against the oppressive Shah regime. People choose death rather than living a vegetated life of slavery, where the modern sovereign state has secularized theological concept in its foundation. According to Talal Asad, political tradition has been separated from religious authority. It's not necessary that political theology would bring a better future for us, but without the foundation in truth, that is singularity coexisting in plural form, that is missing in this time of idea of nation state and everything, it has the potential to create another dictatorship. Therefore, it must have the notion of creating a just world for all, not being trapped in the paradox of inventing enemy, as in the case of the contemporary times of unfortunately. We are living in a hopeless time where the emancipation of toiling masses is being considered as utopia. As we remember, former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher coined and popularized the term that there is no alternative to capitalism. And the ideological apparatus of the bourgeois state has successfully educated the people to believe this phrase. In Living in the End Times, there is a quotation from Slavoj Žižek, who talks about Frederick Jameson, and it is about that it would be much easier to think of a total catastrophe which will cause the of imagination, therefore has gifted us a one-dimensional world where we don't have any alternative. In his recent book, The Relevance of Communist Manifesto, Zizek concludes that even the unconsciousness of the revolutionary mind has the secret conviction that nothing can be changed. Hence, even if mass protest what we are seeing, that like all these protests like happening around the world we see today, has doesn't enable administrative reforms, but the systemic oppression still persists. Hence the question of the mass people has to be the central question of politics of hope. This is the emancipation of the oppressed and marginalized people. But can we imagine this particular kind of emancipatory politics in this age of hopelessness? This is the real challenge of our time. As Alan Badiou believes that most dangerous problem of our time is that we don't have any new fiction, a fiction of the proletariat, a fiction of the oppressed peasant, a fiction of the marginalized people. This fiction or this imagination in the possibility or something beyond what is the hope that we need to look for. Therefore, we need a new fiction, and that's the only hope of our time, by which we can reinvent the politics of the people, where the people will be the center of political question. This new fiction entails a form of epistemic disobedience and theoretical violence with an unlearning of what we know as politics and meaning of life itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, both the speakers. This is very fascinating and very sound theoretical papers, and I'm sure our question answer session will help us in enriching discussion debate. The floor is open now. This is all audience who are there in the on the digital platform. Please go ahead and feel free to ask your questions, observations, whatever it is, and if you want to write, you can also write in the chat box. Please go ahead.
Can I ask my question?
Yes, please.
My question to Ms. Mohapatra is, do you think post-colonial liberalism has aggravated bioterrorism against lower caste people and Muslims in India? My question is like it kind of justifies a lot of things that happen with the marginalized people in India. Don't you think the post-colonial liberal theory, when it kind of pushes the same generalized theories against the marginalized sections of this country?
Yes, hello. Thank you for the question. Yes, I think we have indirectly also addressed this in the paper that this neoliberal regime, what is the post-colonial liberalism that we see around us, obviously it functions with the with the acceptance of the state power by making an enemy, and making the enemy it might be earlier it was the in the Nazi time it was the Jew, maybe now it is the Muslim, and the Rohingyas. So there is always other or enemy that is being made out to be an enemy. It's a conceptual enemy. Obviously, it's not a real enemy, but it's politicized and made out to be an enemy. So. So that is what drives a majoritarian democratic functioning of the state. So yes, we have also sort of addressed this. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Anyone else? By the way, I just like to point out few things, and this is important. But I could see our theoretical connections of what I mean, basing upon the neoliberal market economy, and what Professor Michael Sandel argues about the market society, and how this from the shift from market economy to market society is creating a new sort of an cultural uh, sort of base for the kind of politics which both globally as well as in India we are going through that. I think I mean like, if I give example which may give help us to understand in a better way that how we reduce entire the way you have just said a conceptual enemy, and this the entire project of ethnic democracy, what Professor Samius Moha, an Israeli political sociologist, he argues that the project of ethnic democracy is very much linked to the idea of a neoliberal market economic society, and I'm sure that this took somehow the market economy and then and the quote unquote the right wing in fundamentalism. Do you find any kind of relations or correlations into the both these categories? Or anyone else would like to?
Zunayed, would you?
Yeah, please go ahead, please.
Uh, no, I'm. So, Zunayed, would you like to take this one or?
Hello.
Yes, Junaid, we can
Okay.
hear you. Yeah.
So the thing is that like yes, there is of course like connection that like how this this goes if we like see the like the idea of okay first let me ask you the question again because I think that like I could not get the whole question because my network was had a problem. So can you just give a short question that
Yes, yeah. I just, in a nutshell, it is like this. Do you see any kind of relationship? I mean, of course there are, but what are those nuances? Like any relationship between the idea of market society as defined by Sandel, market society, and its relationship with the idea of ethnic democracy, the way both in Israel and many other parts of the world is exactly going towards that direction. The relationship between market society or ethnic democracy, or you can, or maybe the religious fundamentalism. I mean, to make it narrow it down, what kind of relationship you find? Do you find that there
okay.
is any?
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
of course, of course. So the thing is that like I think that like so first we need to understand that like all kind of problem we are seeing now is a kind of like market problem. Like we are seeing it like different way because the thing is that like whatever like is appearing, so we need to as a like as a student or like reader of like philosophy or like more specifically phenomenology, so we need to like look behind it like behind the appearance. So whatever like we are seeing today that like state and its mechanism and its oppression to the like minority, so we'll find somehow that like somehow somewhere it is connected with the market pressure, like even that like the new laws and everything what is in making, even the farmers protest is going on. And even now if we talk about Bangladesh also like that like all over the world it is happening. So I think there is connection, and market is the root of the problem.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else would like to sort of intervene, or any observations, any questions? I mean,
Abdul Mohsen, I have a question.
please.
Yes, so my question is, I think this it is loosely connected with the topic. So, but I'm asking for the observation, for some sorts of opinion. So, during the pandemic time, we have seen that in the Star of Mysore, this is a newspaper from Mysore. It is called a genocide, and it is termed Muslim as rotten apple. And after that, we have seen that Tabligh Jamaat issues and how the state was responsible. They legitimize that the whole issue. How the Delhi government, the Kejriwal, directly address and he put emphasize that the Muslims, the Tabligh Jamaats are responsible, and they termed uh, as a super spreader. You look that after that we have seen the how it's affect that the economy of Muslims. The 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 seller, the vendors are affected. The the Muslims, uh, they actually hate on the economy of Muslims, and the state has a specific roles, and we have seen that how High Court actually and give the justice to that issue. But my question is that specifically, what was the state responsible, and how state actually uh, took into consideration, or what was the role of the state, and how they are uh, dealing with this issue. Thank you.
I think this is actually a very excellent question. So some of the discussion was in the paper. So I want to add something more that like we need to first understand that like the concept of the state, like how this concept has come. So we discussed earlier that like this the concept of the state when it came. So it is something that like we are giving something that like giving the legitimacy over our life also. So why does state like then do this kind of like discrimination? So it is something that like for its own existence. So there is a Italian philosopher Umberto Eco. So he talks about that like so how that state needs like constant enemy. So when the crisis is going on, that like state needs someone to like blame. That is that happened like everywhere. It's not only in India. Like it happened in Bangladesh also. It happens in like other European countries also. That like they started like blaming some kind of community, and it's always like kind of minority community. Not always minority community. Sometimes it is like class things. Like in Bangladesh, it was not about the minority community, but they started blaming that like the migrant workers that like they came with the COVID. Uh, and they are spreading it, and they are not following the social distancing and everything. So so I think that like this or characteristics of the modern state, that like they somehow in time of crisis like try to uh, like discriminate of its own citizen. I think okay, I think that's that is the answer of your question. But if you want to ask any more things, I would love to like continue.
Okay, thank you. There's another questions in the chat box. I'm sure both Magna and Zubair can see that. Or Hassan, you would like to read out this thing? Yeah, like,
Okay, I can read actually.
okay,
So,
perfect.
okay. So for me, the question was, how do you see the body politics in respect to delegitimizing Bengalis in Assam through NRC? Magna, would you like to like take this question? No, okay, okay. So, so for me, that like this, so it is also that like if you see that like this kind of like this camp, what is like happening? It's not in only in Assam. That is also happening in like Bangladesh also. That like about the Rohingya. So, so there is certain kind of body politics of it. Like think about that like the camping things, like what Foucault also talks about that like the Bantham's panopticon. So it's a kind of that like creating a space where the gauge or like the visibility, and that visibility is a trap. So so through that NRC, so there is certain kind of body politics, and also that like this is somehow very important question, and I don't know that like how to deal with this situation, because when they have all the power over our like body and everything. So I think that like that question somehow being answered in the like presentation, but again that like I want to like again say that like we need to understand the concept of law and state. So so there is like certain kind of things we need to understand the law and how law works. So according to like the without violence, there have to be violence like enforcing the law. So so if you think about that, like what is happening in the Assam or like any or any part of the world. So there this is actually kind of law, and this law has been uh, this law has certain kind of violence in it, within it. So how to deal with these things, that I think that like we can think easily that like against like according to Nietzsche also, that like any kind of extreme position have to be like thrown out of another extreme position. So I think that's it for now. So and there is another question: how can the marginalized purify their body politics? So I think that like this is a question for Magna. So
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think I don't know what more I can add, but I think Zunayed has pretty much covered it very extensively. But I think what we're also trying to say in this paper, that this purification of body politics, it is very complex and it has many layers. Like, we are trying to advocate here a form of opposition to this sort of oppression of the body by what we call as epistemic violence. That is, uh, we need to revolt against the this knowledge processes itself, that like you like we should be able to know that what we are fighting for or who we are fighting for and what are we standing for, and not just because everyone is on the streets and everyone is having posters and having strikes. So not just for what a mass movement, but for our own selves also. So this realization of the self, I think we are trying to say here. And also we are trying to say that this violence needs to this form of violence is not just in the knowledge process, not just in uh, not just in this knowing, but beyond beyond these online or even poster sort of protests. It is we are trying to talk about violence which is beyond words or beyond posters, like with arms and fighting for because when it's going to be that far, it is certainly going to sometime history repeats itself, as they say. It is sometime certainly going to go to an extent, maybe like a second world war, third world war. So when the time comes, we need to be ready to fight with whatever means we have. So I mean, I don't know, maybe it's too radical for here, but yeah, if Zunayed would like to add to this, I don't know, I think that's it.
No, no, no. I don't like to add anything on that. But there was another interesting question that what is the Abdul Bashir? So he's asking that what is the solution to the present political crisis in India? So he's a farmer and okay. So I think that the present political crisis in India, that I don't know that for me, whatever crisis is happening, so we need to diagnose this crisis in deeper level, that what is the actual crisis and who is the real enemy. It's not that any political party or something. There are larger enemies on that political crisis. So I think that understanding the crisis itself can lead us to the solution. uh, okay, so if there is any other question, then, or if there is no other question, then I think we can uh,
Yeah, thank you, Zunayed and Magna, for your presentations, and also for responding a lot of queries and questions. And I'm sure Abdul Bashir Saab's question is very important today. I mean, without, I mean, of course, I don't want to raise the entire debate over here, but one thing is true, that the way our academics, not only in India but globally, the way we engage with everyday issues, and our theoretical assumptions and our tools to understand the everyday problems are so so different, or I would say so so complex, that it's difficult to capture the social imaginations. And I think one of the reasons why India or the South Asia is too poor in theory, one probable reasons could be that our theoretical assumptions or theoretical connections is not empirically sort of grounded. I mean, I'm not talking about this paper and all. I'm talking in general. Just to give an examples, how I mean, the idea of farmer itself, right? I mean, the way we understand farmer, and the way that the farmer is a category, how far this census category as a main cultivator, we this is very multi-layered things. I mean, farmer is also not something homogeneous terms, but I'm sure I do agree with Asir Saab that we really need to seriously engage with our everyday political categories, and how these categories, theoretical categories, really help us to explain the everyday problems and issues. And I'm sure maybe our generations, those who are into a field of social science, they'll do some groundbreaking research which basically help us to understand this problem. And I could find one of the very famous anthropologist, and Professor Jan Bremen, and then his very good work on footloose labor. And I'm sure, Basit Saab, if you go through that book by Jan Bremen, the idea of footloose labor, that will really help us, that the entire political economy, caste classes structure in India's state of Gujarat, because his fieldwork is in Gujarat. By the way, without taking much time, this is thanks to Junaid and Magna for your excellent presentations, and I'm sure that we